everybody. I'm very happy to be here today. Now, for me, this is a bit of a special talk or a special occasion because this will be my very last presentation as CTO at Ripple. I am starting my own company. We are receiving some funding from Ripple, and it's building on a lot of the technology that I've been working on before and while I was at Ripple. So this will be somewhat of a special occasion for me anyway. So what I want to talk to you today, and I've titled it Separation of Consensus and State. Maybe more accurate would be separation of logic and state, but then it wouldn't really be blockchain related, so I've put in consensus and also to kind of recall the church and state idea. And basically what I mean by that is we currently have these very integrated monolithic blockchains. And so I want to think about other architectures, and I don't expect everyone to agree that there's one right architecture. I think that it's a good thing that everyone has sort of their own ideas of how blockchains should be built. But hopefully you'll find my viewpoint interesting because I think it is pretty unique. Now, you might have heard this saying before. It's a very popular sticker. So if you spend any time around tech people, you might see it on their laptops. And obviously it's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but what it's referring to is the fact that when you store your photos or your personal information in the cloud, it's not this magical place that lives outside of physical reality. It's a real server somewhere that somebody's running and that could theoretically be hacked or even physically accessed. And so it's sort of a reminder to be careful about what data you share and where you put your data. And it's also a little bit of a rebellion against buzzwords. And so I want to introduce a similar phrase for the blockchain space, which is there's no blockchain, it's just someone else's computer. And so what I'm talking about is even if you're using a blockchain, and even if it's Byzantine fault tolerant, you're still running on some physical computer somewhere. And it's important to remember that. And whenever you're evaluating using a blockchain for some business purpose or even setting up your own, you should always be thinking about what are the actual servers or computers that this is actually going to run on in the end. Because it matters, because it influences the security, and it impacts what you can do with it and what how other people could attack it. Now, obviously using the most prominent example of a running production blockchain, Bitcoin, the physical servers that are doing the validation and that are deciding the ordering of transactions are the miners, more specifically the mining pools. And so a lot of you might have seen this chart before. This is sort of the current hash rate distribution. And this has been changing a lot over time. I remember there was once a very large pool called DeepBit, which is now basically defunct and non-existent. And so, new mining pools come and go. But these are the companies that are actually validating your Bitcoin transaction when you make one. And most of them are in China. All of the named ones here are in China except for Slush Pool, which is in the Czech Republic. And that's actually, fun fact, the oldest pool. Now, I lied a little bit because two of these pools are actually owned by Bitmain. So the two largest happen to be owned by Bitmain. And so more accurately would be this kind of hash rate distribution. And so when we talk about Bitcoin as this trustless system, we have to think about, well, it is trustless as long as you don't count the trust that you have to have in Bitmain and some of these other mining pools. And some people counter, well, the miners can withdraw the support for the pool, and that's true. However, they can't do that in real time. They're going to be doing that over time if the pool misbehaves. They're not going to be able to stop a double spend attack as it's happening. And so in terms of evaluating the security of a consensus algorithm, you really, to be fair, you have to look at what can somebody do as part of the algorithm, not what is some out-of-band mitigation. Because if you allow for out-of-band mitigation, pretty much every consensus algorithm is going to be secure. Now, choosing these validators, that's sort of the fundamental problem that any consensus system has to solve. If you want to have a distributed system, and again, we want to think about who are the actual nodes that that system runs on, well, you have to choose them somehow. And Bitcoin uses a process called proof of work, as we all know. And it's a very expensive way to select validators. And you might say that it's the only truly decentralized way, and that's a fair statement. However, it's also a fact that it's an extremely expensive way of compiling a list. So you could call this list the most expensive list in the world. And this number is the amount of money that's been spent on mining this year so far. And it's actually on pace to more than double what the network spent last year. Now, if you wanted to put together a list of validators, you wanted to say, okay, who are the best nodes that we should have as the operators of our financial system? You would probably say, well, they shouldn't all be in one country, they should be globally distributed. You'd probably say that they should have very secure data centers. Maybe you care about their sort of mentality, mindset, values, and so on. And maybe there isn't like one set of validators that everyone in the world would agree is the best one. And so it's actually not so easy to find that one group that can run a global system. And so you could say maybe we need the proof of work in order to do that. But you can also take the opposite position, the opposite view, and you can say, I want to be in this business. I want to be in the business of making a list and getting paid $3 billion to do it. That seems like a pretty good business to be in. I'll even undercut them. I'll give you a better list for just $1 billion. And let's leave it at that. Now, I've been thinking about this problem for a long time. And I could be talking about XRP Ledger, which is a consensus ledger, a blockchain, public blockchain, that also uses a form of explicit node selection. So essentially the way it works is that if I want to participate in the XRP Ledger system, I need to select which nodes I'm going to be listening to. Other people do the same. That forms a graph, and we can start to analyze that graph, and we can create an algorithm that has certain properties given a certain graph. And by definition, the validator selections will be in the interest of the users, because the users are making those validator selections. The downside is it's not an automated process. With something like Bitcoin, you get an automatic selection of nodes. So it's really dependent on your use case. If you have a system and you want it to be totally anonymous, it's very hard to select nodes, because if they're anonymous, you don't really know who's behind them, if they're trustworthy or not. And so proof of work is a pretty reasonable way to do that. But if you actually know who the nodes are, and ironically, even in Bitcoin, we now know largely who the mining pools are, why not just select the ones that you want and save yourself $3 billion?